Hello and welcome to News News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Nahami and these are the headlines. A shipment of medical supplies from the UK has arrived in India, where hospitals are facing a shortage of oxygen and beds amid a surge in coronavirus infections. Germany has also decided to airlift oxygen and ventilators to India in coming days as the country's death toll approaches 200,000. Meanwhile, Pakistan has called for greater international solidarity to overcome the impact of the pandemic. Pakistan has so far registered 17,329 deaths and nearly 805,000 infections. Globally, there are more than 3.1 million deaths and around 148 million cases. In a tit-for-tat move, Ukraine says it will declare the Russian envoy in the port city of Odessa persona non grata. The two countries have already expelled the diplomat each after Russia accused a Ukrainian envoy of trying to obtain classified information. In Myanmar, heavy fighting has erupted after an armed militia captured a military base near the Thai border. A spokesperson for the Karen National Union said the camp had been burned down. This comes as the junta said it will positively consider ASEAN'S suggestions on ending the turmoil. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has urged Turkish and Greek Cypriot parties to be creative as talks are set to begin on the island's future after a 4-year hiatus. Guterres has invited foreign ministers of Turkey, Greece and Britain to attend the Geneva-based talks in an effort to resume peace negotiations. The Mediterranean island was split between a Greek Cypriot South and Turkish Cypriot North in 1974. And in tennis, South Africa's Kevin Anderson and Spain's Alejandro Davidovich FOKINA have advanced into the second round of the S.KOREA Open. Anderson came from a set down to beat American Frances Tiafoe 4-6, 7-6 and 7-6, while Davidovich FOKINA defeated compatriot Pablo Andujar 6-3, 4-6 and 6-1 to march ahead. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. A shipment of medical supplies from the UK has arrived in India, where the hospitals are facing a shortage of oxygen and beds amid a surge in coronavirus infections. Germany has also decided to airlift oxygen and ventilators to India in coming days as the country's death toll approaches 200,000. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 3.1 million lives and infected over 147 million people. More on the pandemic in this report.
With an exponential increase in global cases, inoculation challenges and fears of further economic contraction, the end to the COVID-19 pandemic seems nowhere in sight. India has called on its armed forces to help tackle the devastating crisis. Authorities say oxygen will be released from armed forces reserves, and retired medical personnel will join health facilities that are struggling under the strain of cases. WHO's chief scientist Soumya Swaminathan says the actual number of cases in India is being significantly underreported. Moscow says New Delhi will receive the first batch of Russia's Sputnik V vaccine on May 1st. Australia says it will suspend all direct passenger flights from India until May 15th. Meanwhile, the WHO says millions of children are at risk from other life-threatening diseases, mainly because COVID-19 has severely disrupted their regular immunization process.
The pandemic has caused several disruptions to immunization services around the world. New WHO data shows that as a result of COVID-19, 60 immunization campaigns are currently suspended in 50 countries.
Meanwhile, within a week of lifting a ban on Johnson & Johnson's vaccine, US CDC has warned people getting the shots to watch for blood clot symptoms. However, the US says it will start sharing up to 60 million doses of AstraZeneca's vaccine with other countries in coming weeks. Canada has announced to send the Army and Red Cross to its worst affected province, Ontario. Meanwhile, amid unprecedented spikes, Turkey has announced a complete nationwide full closure from April 29th until May 17th.
Avrupa'nın açılma sürecine girdiği bir dönemde
We have to bring down the number of our cases below 5,000 at a time when Europe entered a period of easing the restrictions. Otherwise, it will be inevitable for us to face the heavy consequences in every field, from tourism to trade and education.
Thailand has reported 15 deaths, setting a new daily record for the third time in 4 days, despite new shutdowns in Bangkok and other areas.
Pakistan has registered 142 fatalities from COVID-19 in the past 24 hours. The Health Ministry says the death toll has risen to 17,329. The ministry reported 4,487 overnight infections. It said nearly 805,000 people contracted the virus so far, out of which almost 700,000 have recovered. The number of active cases has jumped to over 87,000. The ministry said more than 5,000 patients are in critical condition. Pakistan has called for greater international solidarity to overcome the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says the crisis is far from over. Virtually addressing the 6 Asian countries foreign ministers conference, Qureshi said all the governments want to revive their economies. He added such fiscal space and liquidity cannot be done in isolation. Qureshi said Pakistan supports the 3 proposals put forward by China for regional cooperation. The foreign minister noted that the countries are vulnerable to climate changes and natural disasters. He added that the pooling of resources and expertise would go a long way in the timely delivery of assistance to affected areas. China, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh held the conference on fighting COVID-19. In a tit-for-tat move, Ukraine says it will declare the Russian envoy in the port city of Odessa persona non grata. The 2 countries have already expelled a diplomat each after Russia accused a Ukrainian envoy of trying to obtain classified information. Tensions have soared in recent weeks over a Russian military buildup near the Ukrainian border that raised alarm in both Kiev and in the West. Last week, Russia said it had begun returning the troops to their permanent bases. Russia says the actions by the US and the NATO alliance in Europe are contributing to an increased military threat. State media quoted Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu as saying that Moscow will act as it sees fit to ensure security at its border. Earlier in a phone call, French President Emmanuel Macron urged his Russian counterpart to reduce tensions with Ukraine. In a statement, the Kremlin said Vladimir Putin drew attention to the provocative actions of Kiev. This comes days after Moscow ordered a withdrawal of some troops from its border with Ukraine. Russia says the Open Skies Treaty is on the verge of collapse. Head of the Russian delegation on arms control, Konstantin Gavrilov, said no unilateral concessions should be expected from Russia for the treaty. Gavrilov said the US and its allies blamed Russia for the state of the pact as if Washington never withdrew from it. He said Moscow is ready to discuss the concerns of stakeholders, but only after the US returns. The US has withdrawn from the treaty after accusing Moscow of violating the pact and of selective implementation. The agreement establishes a program of unarmed aerial surveillance flights over the territories of participants. In Myanmar, heavy fighting has erupted after an armed militia captured a military base near the Thai border. A spokesperson for the Karen National Union said the camp had been burnt down. A Thai official in Mae Hong Son province said one person had been wounded during the fighting. This comes as the junta said it will positively consider ASEAN's suggestions on ending the turmoil. Meanwhile, anti-coup activists have resumed protests in Mandalay and Yangon. Activists say security forces have killed more than 750 civilians in the crackdown on protesters so far. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has urged Turkish and Greek Cypriot parties to be creative as talks are set to begin on the island's future after a 4-year hiatus. Guterres has invited foreign ministers of Turkey, Greece and Britain to attend the Geneva-based talks in an effort to resume peace negotiations. The Mediterranean island was split between a Greek Cypriot South and a Turkish Cypriot North in 1974. The Greek Cypriot administration is internationally recognized as the Cyprus government, while the breakaway Turkish Cypriot is recognized only by Ankara. The conflict has stoked wider tensions between NATO members Turkey and Greece, including over hydrocarbon resources. The talks between Iran and the world powers to revive the 2015 Iran nuclear deal will resume today in Vienna. In a statement, the EU's political director Enrique Mora said the US possible return to the pact and its implementation will be discussed. Mora noted that although nothing has changed on paper, but a lot has changed informally. He said the US-Iran distrust and the hostility from Arab countries and Israel against the pact are the major hurdles going forward. Meanwhile, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani said the world has no choice but to agree with Iran and lift sanctions. The US has accused Iran of harassing its Coast Guard ships in the Persian Gulf early this month. US Navy's Middle East-based 5th Fleet said April's second encounter resulted in no injuries or damage. Fleet's spokesperson said 2 ships commanded by Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps cut in front of the US ships. Rebecca Reberich said this caused the US ships to come to an abrupt stop and to make defensive maneuvers to avoid a collision. The spokesperson said the US crews issued multiple warnings via radio and shot blasts from the ship's horns. Commander said Iranian Hard 55 responded to the radio queries but continued the unsafe maneuvers. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Britain's Queen Elizabeth's aircraft carrier will lead a flotilla of Royal Navy ships through Asian waters on port visits to Japan and South Korea. The warships would carry out drills with forces from Japan, Australia, France and India, among others. In a statement, the British Embassy in Tokyo said the fleet would also be joined by vessels from the US and a frigate from the Netherlands. The Royal Navy says the ships will also stop in India and Singapore. The high-profile voyage is aimed at bolstering security ties in East Asia and comes amid tensions in the region. China has lodged a protest with Japan over its annual diplomacy report. The document expressed grave concerns about Beijing's military capabilities and maritime activities. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin said the report hyped up the so-called China threat. At a news briefing, Wenbin said the report smears China and interferes in the country's internal affairs. Beijing urged Tokyo to redress its mistake and to build stable relations with concrete actions. The United States says it will seek cooperation with China even as it competes with Beijing. At a press briefing, State Department spokesperson Ned Price termed the US-China bilateral relations multifaceted. Price said Washington needs to mobilize its resources and work with allies to compete with China on some fronts. However, he added cooperation with Beijing in areas such as climate and Iran nuclear issue remains open. This comes a day after China vowed to step up its support for Russia amid tightening Western sanctions. South Korea has urged the North to implement inter-Korean agreements and step ahead for talks. Unification Minister Lee In-young made the remarks at the third anniversary of the historic 2018 summit. Lee said South Korea is willing to resume talks with the North anytime, anywhere, and on any issue. He reiterated that the peace in Korean Peninsula can only be realized through dialogue and cooperation. The Unification Minister expressed hope that Pyongyang will come out for talks at an early date. Inter-Korean exchanges and peace talks have stalled since the failure of a summit between North and the US in 2019. In Afghanistan, at least 5 people have been killed by unidentified gunmen in eastern Nangarhar province. Local authorities say a former Taliban member also died in the incident. They said 3 others were wounded in the shooting. No group has claimed the responsibility for the attack yet. Meanwhile, Kabul says at least 10 Taliban have been killed in a rocket attack in Medan Wardak province. In a tweet, the Ministry of Interior said many others were wounded. Israeli police have clashed with Palestinians a day after the removal of barriers outside Jerusalem's Damascus Gate. The Israeli forces arrested several Palestinians who gathered at the East Jerusalem Plaza to celebrate the removal of barricades. Meanwhile, the Human Rights Watch says Israel is committing apartheid and is persecuting Palestinians. In a report, the international rights watchdog said Israel's actions amount to crimes against humanity. The watchdog called on the International Criminal Court to investigate the systematic discrimination against Palestinians. At least 2 people have been killed and 27 others injured in Chad as demonstrators took to the streets demanding a return to civilian rule. A spokesman for the military council said the security forces were attempting to contain the protesters. Police responded with tear gas as the protesters burned tires in several neighborhoods of N'Djamena. The military council has banned protests, saying no demonstrations that could lead to disorder are allowed. The protests come as Chad's military council named a civilian politician Albert Bahimi Badake as prime minister of a transitional government. But opposition leaders have dismissed the appointment, saying it is not up to the military council to designate a premier. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron has condemned the treatment of protesters in Chad. In Nigeria, kidnappers have killed 2 more students they had abducted from a university in northwest Kaduna State. Last Tuesday, unknown gunmen had kidnapped 20 students along with 3 non-academic staff. Local authorities said the security agencies have recovered the bodies of 2 students. Earlier, they had found 3 bodies in a nearby village. During the assault, a member of the Greenfield University staff was also killed. This is the 5th known attack on a school or a college to kidnap officials and students for ransom since December. But the Nigerian authorities have repeatedly vowed not to pay a ransom to the bandits. Saudi Arabia's King Salman bin Abdulaziz has invited the Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, to visit the kingdom. Riyadh and allies broke off ties with Doha in June 2017, but have agreed to re-establish relations with Qatar earlier in January. The Emir's office said Sheikh Tamim received the invitation from Saudi Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan during a reception in Doha. Qatar's foreign ministry said the 2 sides discussed the Gulf unity. Qatar state media said they discussed bilateral relations and ways to strengthen them in all spheres. It said they also exchanged views on regional and international developments as well as on a number of issues of common interest. The United States and the European Union have rejected redrawing the Western Balkan borders. The idea was floated after an unofficial diplomatic note was circulated among the EU officials. US State Department spokesperson Ned Price said changing borders would only increase regional tensions. EU chief spokesperson Eric Mamer said Brussels does not favor any geographical changes. The document proposed breaking up Bosnia and merging Kosovo with Albania. It also suggested incorporating parts of Bosnia into Serbia and Croatia to aid European integration. The diplomatic note has not been claimed by any country and could not be verified for its authenticity. EU lawmakers have kicked off the last debate on the post-Brexit trade agreement between the European Union and Britain. This precedes a key vote that is expected to give the accord overwhelming approval. Speaking in Brussels, EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen said Brussels will not hesitate from punishing London for breaching the deal. She said the trade and cooperation agreement will give the EU more leverage over the UK. The UK government has been accused of breaching its commitments in Northern Ireland and on fisheries. It was brought into force provisionally along with the rest of the trade deal in January ahead of the ratification. The US and the UK have imposed sanctions on a member of Guatemala's Congress over alleged corruption. In a statement, the US Treasury said it blacklisted Congressman Felipe Eloz Lorzana and a former Chief of Staff Gustavo Adolfo Eloz Scambara. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the curbs support Guatemala's efforts to end corruption. In a statement, he said the move comes as part of Washington's commitment to support improved governance in Guatemala. The sanctions freeze any U.S. assets of the blacklisted people and bars Americans from dealing with them. Meanwhile, Britain also imposed sanctions against Lorenzana along with the Honduran congressman for facilitating bribes. Venezuela says its armed forces have suffered casualties in fighting with irregular Colombian armed groups in the past 72 hours. Defense Minister Vladimir Pedrino says clashes took place in the west of the border town of La Victoria. In a statement, Pedrino said the Venezuelan forces killed and captured many fighters of the armed groups. He accused the groups of seeking to export the narco-paramilitary model to Venezuela to destabilize the country. However, the defense minister did not specify the number of casualties to either side. Thousands of Venezuelans have crossed the border into Colombia since fighting in the western state of Apure broke out in late March. In Crimea, blooming peach gardens alongside the southern coast have become an excellent backdrop for a costume ball. Details in this report.
Although spring has been late this year and peach trees just began to bloom, they're as beautiful as ever. A costume ball is being held at the blooming peach gardens near Ternovka village in the Crimean Peninsula. Dozens of couples dance the waltz, square mazurka, and other classic styles. Works by Johann Strauss, Pyotr Tchaikovsky, Wolfgang Mozart, and other famous classical composers were played for the participants. Organizers say they wanted to preserve the beauty of Crimean nature and ball dancing, which organically came in tune with each other through the event.
And other business updates, European stocks are trading mixed as global markets prepare for the US Federal Reserve's two-day meeting. Italy's FTSE MIB has shed close to 0.5%. Meanwhile, London's FTSE, the Pan-European Stock 600 and Frankfurt's DAX have also shed fractionally. However, the CAC 40 in Paris has edged up above the flat line. Earlier, most Asian stocks declined with the exception of Hong Kong's Hang Seng. In football, Leicester City have moved closer to Champions League qualification after they came from behind to beat Crystal Palace 2-1. The win leaves the Foxes in third place on the Premier League table with 62 points, 5 behind Manchester United. Wilfred Zaha fired Palace ahead in the 12th minute, but Timothy Castaigne equalised for the Foxes in early second half. Leicester's winner came in the 80th minute with Kelechi Iheanacho smashed home to complete the turnaround at King Power Stadium. The goal came as Iheanacho's 12th in the last 9 games. The Foxes are now 7 points clear of the 4th placed West Ham, while Crystal Palace are 13th with 38 points. In National Basketball Association, DeMar DeRozan and DeJounte Murray lead the way for San Antonio Spurs as they edged Washington Wizards 146 to 143 in overtime. The win comes as 3rd consecutive for the Spurs and snaps Washington's 8-game winning streak. DeRozan recorded 37 points for the Spurs, while Murray finished with 25 points and 17 rebounds. Washington's Bradley Beal topped the scoring chart with 45 points but failed to avert their defeat. Meanwhile, Phoenix Suns beat New York Knicks 118 to 110 to end their 9-game winning streak. Devin Booker scored a game-high 33 points for the Suns, followed by Mikal Bridges adding 21. In other matches, Minnesota Timberwolves edged past Utah Jazz 105 to 104. While Denver Nuggets dominated Memphis Grizzlies 120 to 96 points. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. With the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.